Hello! Welcome to episode 3 of Paths and Crafts. I must apologise, I know that these episodes are being spaced further and further apart, it seems. Various things getting in the way of me creating them. Life, PhD work, also going on field work for most of the summer didn't help. But hopefully now I'm trying to get a little bit more on track. This episode will focus on an object which is a little bit, well, it's not easier to make than the last two objects that I've made, but it's definitely a different kind of process. You don't need as many tools, for example. However, the actual process of making it is probably chemically more complicated. We're here, by the way. The reason that I'm outside and not inside in my little study is because we're not actually at home at the moment. We are currently visiting my parents up in Scotland, which is absolutely beautiful. I have to show you the view. But I mean, check out that view. Not bad. So really gorgeous location, but one of the nice things about being here, so my dad is actually an artist. He has worked with many different kinds of materials over the years. He used to do a lot of stone carving, wood carving, furniture making, all kinds of different things. Now he's mainly into pottery and all of that kind of stuff, so I thought I'd take advantage of that while I was here. So if you walk along in the flower patch of my parents, you might notice, for example, a face, and maybe a hand. And if you go along here, there's another face. Here is one of the sun worshippers, sort of his latest kind of design that he does a lot of. And here you'll see another face. This is also one of my favourite examples of his designs. It's a wooden one that he made with a chainsaw called Pear Bottom. And he also made lots of little versions as well, which I love. I have one at home. Here you can see some more examples in the studio of his work. So lots of different things he's getting up to. He likes sort of faces and random body parts. And today we're going to be focusing on the Venus figurines. So for those of you who don't know what these are little, well, ranging in size figurines that are found from the very upper Paleolithic period, so 20 to 30,000 years ago in human history. And they're known as Venus figurines because they are very feminine in their shape, shall we say. They often have very exaggerated breasts and hips. Quite often they don't have any facial features and they don't have much detail around like the hands or the feet. So it's really just this very obvious sort of hourglass figure. Also, what's interesting is a lot of them are not exactly completely hourglass, shall we say. They don't have like tiny cinched in waists. Some of them do, but a lot of them also show quite a big belly or pronounced flab in various places, which then has been interpreted as being sort of a mother goddess figure, a sign of fertility, all kinds of associations. Whether or not they should be called Venus figurine has been a matter of some contention in recent years. They were initially called it because they were thought to represent indeed a very feminine figure, but it was also a little almost not sarcastic, but sort of because they were quite often overweight or not exactly what we would consider in modern Western society the ideal form, you know, in terms of media portrayal of women, etc. And because of that, the term then, the Venus, was sort of applied in a little bit of a, oh yeah, well, you know, it's a Venus figurine because look, it's a woman. And then people nowadays are saying, well, maybe we shouldn't call it that then. Maybe we should just call them the women figurines, the female figurines. Whether or not they represented actual women is completely unknown, like as in actual people in the past, whether they were self-portraits, whether they were portraits of someone else, or whether they just were made to represent this idea of the feminine, of fertility, of women in general. Nobody really knows. It's kind of, there's lots of ideas floating around. But they are fascinating objects, and there's many different styles across the world, and we see them in pretty much every culture of the world. You see some form of Venus or women figurine. being created. And so it's obviously something that is important in early human society. It's this concept. And so, yes, so we will be looking at them a little bit today. There is the pottery studio. So this will be our little setup for the day, overlooking the river and Mount Keen over there, which would be very nice. And we need the clay, which is down in here. Okay, we've got our clay. So we have our clay here, and that's actually all we need, which is pretty incredible compared to the last 2 episodes where we have needed not only the raw materials to actually make our objects, so the amber for the amber beads and the bone for the bone needles, but we also needed to actually create the tools that we needed to make the objects from those raw materials. So we needed a whole range of different expertises in different materials. So we needed to know how to work flint, we needed to know how to work antler, we needed to know how to work also the bone, obviously, and the amber. It requires a lot more, I guess, wider range, cross-craft understanding, shall we say. Whereas with pottery, the great thing is that, yes, it requires a different level of understanding and a different level of know-how, because obviously you have to be able to fire it, right? And you have to, which we'll get to in a bit, and you have to understand the kind of chemical processes associated with that. Even if you don't actually know the chemical processes themselves, you have to understand that something needs to happen. So it's not that you can, just drill a hole in a bead, polish it, and then, hey, it's a bead. Like, you create your object, and then you still need to do stuff to it to make sure that it actually remains good. So it obviously requires a lot more sophistication on that respect, but in terms of the tools you need, in terms of the kind of level of material expertise you need, I would say that pottery is actually, there's a reason that it was one of the earliest crafts that came about compared to carving and those kind of things, because it's sort of you messing around with your hands, and then eventually you find something, and then you can create something beautiful out of it. And you don't need loads of extra tools to be able to do it. You can, of course, use extra tools, and there's evidence of people using sticks. I mean, I have these actual pottery tools here, the little wooden ones. And people would have used similar things, just whittled out of sticks and out of wood, or just made from wood lying around, but would also have just used, for example, their fingers. Okay, so let's get our bit of clay out here. Oh, this is a big chunk of clay. And obviously I am using here some lovely potter's clay, which has been specially prepared and nicely processed and everything. But of course, people in the past wouldn't have had that. They would have got their clay from local sources, a.k.a. mud, lying around in the ground. For this reason, you often see a lot more inclusions, you see a lot more irregularities, and it's great though, because quite often, oh, that's useful, I might just use that even. Quite often you can actually tell where an object is sourced, obviously if it's made from clay, if it has certain inclusions and things, because then you can do some nice analyses to try and determine the chemical composition of the clay, and then see from that where it could have originated, where people could have got that clay from. So that's particularly interesting. And that's especially interesting for the object that we will talk about a bit today, which is called the Venus of Dolní Věstonice, is actually the oldest figurine clay object, the oldest clay figurine that we know of so far today, complete figurine. It was found alongside multiple other broken figurines, so for all we know there were many figurines being made thousands of years before, but the Venus of Dolní Věstonice dates back to around 29,000 years ago. And that's particularly interesting because if you think that the first kind of clay vessels, so bowls and plates and things, they only start emerging around 20,000 years ago. So you have at least 9,000 years in between the first clay being worked, the first clay figures being made, and people actually making these things into sturdy and durable vessels and plates, which I find quite interesting. Anyway, so we're going to try and make then the Venus of Dolní Věstonice. I have a beautiful replica of this Venus figurine from Potted History, who are a fantastic father-daughter collaboration, who make amazing replicas of prehistoric, historic, medieval, and any if it was around in the past, they probably make a replica of it. They also have an amazing YouTube channel, which I will link here in the caption below, where they share examples of how to make different prehistoric things and different historic things. But so the Venus of Dolní Věstonice is sort of very long and thin, quite long legs, but indeed quite bulbous, quite kind of hanging pendulous breasts. So we're going to try, oh gosh, I have no idea even how to start this. I think I'll probably just try making a rough shape. I'm going to make her a bit smaller than the original one would have been. So let's first just try and make the rough shape, and then we'll see how we do. So a little more information about the Venus of Dolní Věstonice, so the oldest clay object in the world that we know of. So like I say, she dates to 29,000 years ago, so from the Paleolithic period. And in this period, in the Paleolithic period, this is when we find a lot of what are called Venus figurines that I spoke about earlier, starting to emerge in the archaeological record, especially in Europe, in sort of Western, Central, Eastern Europe. However, you do find them all over the world, but they're particularly prevalent in Paleolithic Europe, or sort of that region and that time. And as I say, no one's particularly sure what they're supposed to represent, but they all have this very pronounced breasts and hips and things, and most of the time they're naked. I don't know of any examples actually that have clothes. The only things that they do have are some sort of thing on their head. However, it's unsure whether that represents some kind of headdress or whether it might be, for example, braided hair or something like that. So yes, so the Venus of Dolní Věstonice is kind of interpreted as one of the earliest of these, shall we say, and one of the oldest sort of clay objects. You might be familiar with the Venus of Willendorf, which is the most famous, I think, of the Venus figurines. So she came about around 25,000 years ago, so about 4,000 years after the Venus of Dolní Věstonice. And she's actually not made from clay, and the majority of the Venus figurines, I think, would have been made from stone, so carved from stone, and that's why we can find them. But clay itself is a really interesting material because especially the earlier forms, as I mentioned before, probably didn't preserve as well, especially if they were actually being handled or they were being kind of exposed to the elements a little more often. They wouldn't have survived as long as modern kind of fired glazed pottery, right? Because they definitely weren't glazing these objects. They were firing them, but also the way they were firing them, the first fired objects wouldn't have been fired in a kiln. They would have just been fired in the fireplace, which is why, especially on objects like the Dolní Věstonice, Venus, you can see that she's sort of got areas of her which are more fired than others in that respect, which is quite interesting. And it's more difficult. Any kind of potter will tell you that it is more difficult, obviously, to regulate temperature in a fire than in a kiln. And you know, it's exposed to the elements. You're more kind of at the mercy of nature, shall we say, than in a nice regulated kiln. Even the early kilns would obviously have also been much more rudimentary than the ones we have now, but still it would have been a little easier to control different parameters than when you just stick it in a fire. So considering that, it's actually amazing that something like the Venus of Dolní Věstonice actually did survive. And what's interesting is they found her on site, probably where she would have been made. So she hadn't actually been carried around and transported that far. Exactly how long it was between her being made and her being kind of deposited on the ground, we don't know, obviously. But yes, so she was made locally. She was made from local materials, and then left to her own devices, shall we say, at the site of Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic. This was, by the way, well, what we now know of the Czech Republic. Obviously, they wouldn't have called it the Czech Republic back in the Paleolithic period. Okay, I think I just checked the picture again. I think I need to make it even more bulbous around the belly area. I haven't really made her curvy enough. She's still a little bit too flat-stomached. So one of the suggestions of what these figurines might have represented is usually related to fertility idol. And for this reason, that's why it's interpreted that these objects are always very voluptuous, very well endowed in terms of breasts, because obviously the bigger breasts you have, the better able you are to produce milk, is the theory, obviously. And, you know, even if that's not true, it could still be that that association was already in place in the past as well. Or just simply that basically any woman who gives birth, her boobs are going to be forever changed. I can testify this as someone who has given birth about a year ago. And, you know, you use them for different things than you used them before. And when you look at these objects, they are indeed, they're not, you know, they're naked, but it's not kind of cinched waist, pert boobs kind of naked. It's very much a slightly sagging stomach and very much lengthened breasts, which could be caused through something like giving birth and breastfeeding a child, because then once you give birth, your sort of stomach muscles, they do change, and it's more difficult to get back to your, you know, springy form that you might have been before, if you want to get back to that. But so for that reason, a lot of people have assumed that these figurines would have been represented women who had given birth, and for that reason they sort of represent fertility and potentially indeed something like a mother goddess. One of my favorite theories related to this is that these figurines would have been almost self-portraits from women, because nearly all of them are faceless. They don't have a face, so they have like a head. Quite a lot of them have arms, even hands, sometimes feet, although very rarely. But yeah, they don't usually have defined facial features, which would make sense if you're living in a culture that doesn't have mirrors, and the only kind of way that you can see yourself in that respect is to look down. And if you think, okay, I'm a woman, I've just given birth recently, not even recently necessarily, but I have given birth, so, you know, the boobs are down here, the stomach is definitely out a little bit, you see your hips when you're sitting down. If you would look down at yourself, you might see that kind of accentuated lumps, shall we say, the accentuated bumps of your body. So I think it would actually make sense that these could be kind of self-portraits from women, so they would have been made by women in the past. Obviously, this is just a theory. This is just my favorite pet theory. I'm not saying at all that it would have been something that's, you know, actually happened. As with everything archaeologically, we can't ever really know. But I just like it as a theory in that respect. Okay, I was trying not to use too many tools when making this. I wanted to see if I could just use my fingers, but some of the cracks do need a little bit of extra pressure in that respect. Okay, I think I'm happy with the general shape of the belly and bottom. I need to get her belly down a little bit more. She's kind of got that nice, stop focusing on me. You know, there's her lovely little bottom, and she's got the nice little belly. I need to add in, she's got the original has quite a sort of defined line here, a little belly button, but I'll add that in at the end. So now we need to do the breasts, which, yes, are quite, as I said, they're quite long, they hang quite low, which again would make sense for a woman who's recently given birth, or has given birth several times and is breastfeeding a lot. More clay. Got my cutting tool. Just need a little sliver though, don't need too much. There we go. Okay. Actual tool. Oh. Clean, nice and moist. Throw it out. Otherwise my father may kill me. Oh, well, not really. He's got lots of clay, but you know. Whoever says it's like really easy to just make replicas of things, you're basically just copying stuff. Like, how hard can it be? Very hard is the answer. Because the problem is I usually only make, you know, replica object types. So then it doesn't really matter too much if it doesn't look exactly like a particular archaeological example, you know, because you're just making an example of a type or of a style or something like that. This is the first time I've ever tried to make something like actually that existed, an object that existed, so the Venus of Dolní Věstonice. And I must say I am completely ruining everything because I got the dimensions of everything wrong the first time, and then the problem is you think like, how hard can it be? It's just, you know, breasts and a stomach and things, but actually, yeah, surprisingly hard because, yeah, then the breasts are now just coming from the neck, which doesn't make any sense. How does that work? I need to have another look at the picture of it. My shoulders are completely wrong. I don't know what's happened with that. It's just a little, I don't know, it's all a little bit off. I'm sort of happy with this section, and I'm happy with the bum at the moment and the back, but I need to add a little more to the front here. It's also ended up being, I initially said, I think when I started this video, oh, I'm just going to make a smaller version. I'm not going to make like a true size version. This is going to be like a monster version by the time I'm finished. And simply because it's the inevitable, I think, you know, you add a little bit of eyeliner to one side and then a little more, oh, that's a bit too much. Okay, I'll just add a little bit more to this. I'll just add a little bit more, and then you end up with like panda eyes. That was basically me with this Venus figurine. I just kind of was like, oh, I'll make the bum nice and rounded, and then looked and went, actually, the bum's not supposed to be quite that rounded. Let's make the belly more rounded, and then, oh wait, hang on, but then the boobs need to be like this. So, okay, let's make the boobs a bit big. Wait, now the bum's not rounded enough, and now I've just noticed that one of my bum cheeks is much bigger than the other. Which, you know, okay, right, so. Not easy, guys. I know probably a lot of you who do clay and pottery at home are going, what is she doing? She's making a faff of everything. Probably I am, but the problem is I want it to look roughly like the original, and at the moment it's still kind of weird. The shoulders are going a bit strange. Okay, I think I need to look at another picture again, and unfortunately the picture's on my phone, so I'm going to have to look at that and then get back to you. Okay, so I worked out what was wrong with the figurine. Most of you probably worked that out already, but it was this weird little kind of collarbone thing. So this looks much better now. It doesn't look like her boobs are just coming from her chin. Her shoulders look a bit better, and I've managed to make the belly look a little more how it is supposed to as well. Obviously, it's still very, you know, rough and probably not a great replica, but I'm quite happy with it. I also made the head a bit smaller because, yeah, I made it a massive blooming head, and her head actually isn't that big. So now we need to add all the little bits of decoration. So for example, she has a little belly button. So we've got to add the little belly button. I've added now this sort of line along the bottom, but let's just accentuate that a little bit more. She has some dots on her head as well, which people are a bit unsure what they might be. Some people suggest it was some kind of hairstyle. On her back she had almost like, some people have interpreted it as kind of fat creases, and some have interpreted it as just the spine kind of being shown. What I love, by the way, about this particular object is that also she had a fingerprint on her back. And when they analysed the fingerprint, they looked at the size of it, they looked at, you know, morphometrics and all of that. They discovered that it was very likely to have been left by a child because it was so small. Too small to be even a small female hand necessarily, although, you know, that could fit with my theory, right, of the fact that these are self-portraits. So, yeah, that was kind of cool that it was touched by a child at some point before being fired. So the fingerprint was in the back. Let's see if I can leave a little fingerprint. We'll see. Probably won't come up. I'll show up on the object. But yes, she also had sort of almost eye type things on her face. They almost look like kind of slanting eyes. So we're going to add them in. And yeah, what else did she have? Oh yeah, she had the legs, of course. So we're going to add in a groove for between the legs, on the front, and also on the back. this is kind of as good as she's gonna get. Yeah, I think this is it. I think this is my masterpiece. If you're watching, Sarah from Potted History, I'm sorry. I did my best. I mean, really, it would have been a lot easier if I'd just brought my replica with me that I have from Potted History. But for some reason, I didn't think to bring a replica of the Venus of Dolní Věstonice with me when I came to visit my parents for a week. Which is odd. You would think that that would be something on my packing list. Next time, definitely putting it on my packing list. And the reason that I'm making these videos is not to show, you know, an expert of technology, because I'm definitely not that. I have maybe a more expertise in terms of archaeological understanding of prehistoric materials from a purely kind of academic standpoint, and I have done a lot of experimental archaeology, so I do have some experience with certain materials and that kind of thing, but I am definitely by no means an expert in all of these materials. And I think there's no way you could be an expert in every single material, especially not in the modern day. So for example, I would definitely check out the channel by Potted History if you want to see how this is really done. And I will share the link in the comments below. But I hope that these videos kind of show you that, you know, it is possible to make something make something related to research and related to academic research, even if you're not a scientist or a researcher yourself, and even if you're not necessarily an expert in the material. You know, practice makes perfect, and not that perfection is ever something that we should have to aim for, and I'm definitely not aiming for that, as you can tell in my objects, but it's something that, you know, just messing around yourself and trying things out. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work, you know? I mean, this one, I'm amazed that nothing broke in this one compared to the last two videos where the amber beads split and the bone needle broke and everything. I mean, and that just goes to show you, right, that it's not perfect, and mistakes will be made, and you should just need to work through them, and that's all part of the learning process. So I hope that these videos inspire you to try out experimental archaeology, prehistoric technology for yourself, try to get an understanding of how these materials that, you know, our ancestors used would have worked and would have been worked. And I hope these videos also show you that, you know, people in the past are a lot smarter and a lot more savvy than we give them credit for a lot of the time. Archaeologists, including myself, always get annoyed at people who assume that people living in the past would have had to have supernatural assistance in order to do XYZ. This is usually related to building monuments, for example, and quite a lot of the time it's, you know, oh, but there's no way that people in the past could have understood how to move this massive rock. It must have been aliens. It's very insulting, I think, not just to people in the past, but almost to us, because we developed from this society. So if we developed from a society that was so stupid it didn't understand the basic concept of, oh, if I want to lift a heavy rock, I can lever it. You know, that's something that we know people in the past had this complex understanding of materials. And yes, maybe they didn't have what we would define as kind of science. They didn't know the physics equations. They didn't know chemical compositions necessarily. But for example, with clay, they would have known how long something needed to be in the fire before it could be classed as being fired. They would have known what kind of mixture and ratio of kind of soil to water to create the mud to use as clay in the creation of these objects. They would have understood these concepts at a different level to how we understand them now. Maybe we understand them more in terms of the kind of nitty-gritty chemical composition. They would have understood it in terms of the texture, the feel. And actually, if you talk to potters nowadays, or if you talk to any kind of traditional technology expert nowadays, they will say the same thing. I have my podcast, which I will also give the link to underneath, where I speak to quite a lot of people who are specialized in particular crafts. So for one of my episodes, I spoke to a professional blacksmith, and he talked about how, you know, even in modern blacksmithing, you don't say, yes, you need to wait until the metal reaches X, you know, temperature. You say, oh, it needs to be like ruby red, or it needs to be white hot, it needs to be sparking. So it's related to the color, it's related to the sound of the metal that it's making. So it is an understanding of the properties, but just from a different angle, if that makes sense. So this is why I always get really annoyed when people assume that people in the past were stupid, because they definitely weren't. They had a very complex understanding of the world around them. And even something as apparently simple as creating a Venus figurine is surprisingly difficult and is surprisingly complex and requires a lot of steps. And something like creating the amber bead or the bone needles that we have done in previous videos requires an understanding of the mechanics of the drilling and the pressures involved and what will happen if you do something. And that we might not think of that as complex thought, but it is complex thought. Just think of, for example, a little baby. You can see how they develop, and you can see how their mind starts to develop as they grow older and how they start to understand different things. That's exactly that level of understanding is something that people in the past would have had as well. And, you know, obviously at a higher level even, because they weren't all babies. And so, yes, it's something that I've ranted now, I know, for a while, but I just think this is something very important, and I think it's something that, especially on platforms such as YouTube, too often the argument against this is shared, and I just wanted to put my 2 cents in to say, you know, people in the past were not stupid, and that's basically what you're saying. If you're saying that they couldn't have done it by themselves, you're saying that they were stupid, and they weren't. And we have evidence of this through artifacts such as the one that I just created a replica of, this little Venus figurine. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Venus figurines today, but actually there's not that much more to be said about them in general. Venus of Dolní Věstonice, I talked about her a little bit, and yeah, they're more just these fascinating objects, and exactly what they represented is still something that's under discussion and a bit unsure, but they're just one kind of type of object from this time period. And I find them very interesting and very fascinating, least of all because, yeah, they're beautiful objects, and they're also different, the styles as well. I would definitely recommend looking up kind of Venus figurines, Paleolithic, and seeing what comes up and seeing the sort of range of body types and styles and everything. I think especially in the modern world where we have this kind of perfect body type image, and image and outside image is considered so important by, you know, the media and everything, and society. I think that looking back at these women or depictions of women from 30,000 years ago is quite enlightening, and I think that it's, you know, at least for me, it's very liberating to see, like, okay, you know what, yes, maybe after giving birth my stomach is a little bigger and my boobs hang a little lower than they did before I gave birth, but that is something that happens with women, and this happened to women 30,000 years ago as well. So, you know, it's not just us, ladies. It's a lot of things, and, you know, men as well. You have all of these depictions of kind of the perfect male body and everything, but actually, if you look back to, you know, Paleolithic and back further than, for example, the Greek statues are obviously something very different, because they do show what we would consider the ideal male body in terms of all the muscles and everything, which just, you know, come on. But yes, if you look back further, you find some very interesting depictions of masculinity and, you know, what it meant to be masculine in those days and back then. So definitely interesting to see the different perceptions of the body as they have changed through the ages, which, you know, I feel like we should go back to this. It's normal to have a slightly sagging belly and a nice round bum, and, you know, I'm very pleased with my collarbone, actually. That makes a lot more sense now. It also makes logical sense to me why we would need a collarbone. And again, see, this shows an understanding of basic biology and physics in that sense. You know, if you have large weights hanging on your front, you're going to need muscles here to kind of hang them off. Anyway, I will stop my rant there. I didn't mean to go on a rampage, but just this is something that I feel very passionately about, as you can probably guess, so I wanted to talk to you about it. But I hope that you enjoyed today. This is a bit of a different video. I thought, like I said, I just wanted to take advantage of this beautiful location and being in this beautiful studio from my dad. Unfortunately, I'm probably not going to be able to show the firing process, but I might show that in a later little short. So I'll make sure to share that here as well once that's uploaded. But yeah, join me again next time. Keep an eye as well on my Tea-Day shorts. I try to release them once a week. I'll try to be a bit more regular with these Pasts and Crafts episodes as well. But as you can tell, life gets in the way, and yeah, so they might still have to be a little bit more sporadic, but I will do my best. I also have another idea for potential project that's coming up, so you know, keep an eye on my socials and things for that. If, by the way, you want to keep in touch, you know, or keep in touch with what I'm doing, not just here, but also on my podcasts that I run, and also my Instagram account and various other projects that I have going on, you can subscribe to my newsletter that comes out once a month, and I just share things I'm doing. I share links to interesting upcoming events. I share links to papers that I think are interesting, and also I give a monthly microware challenge. So if you're interested in learning a bit more about microware and trying out your detective skills on some microware images, do give that a follow. So I will put the link downstairs. I will put the link in the box underneath as well in the description. But yes, see you next time, and I will hopefully do something else a little bit interesting. Maybe some carving, we'll see. Something else a little more creative next time.